Calling it how I see it. I think Oregon rolls Oklahoma State.
You are Locked On Ducks, your daily podcast on the Oregon Ducks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, it is that time once again for Locked On Ducks. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you all so much for making this your first listen or your first view of the day. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, your number one source to stay up to date with the Ducks. Everything Oklahoma State matchup today on the show. Keys to the game, who to watch for on the Cowboys, guys who could pop. We've got a lot to get to. I'm so excited to watch a number of things in this game for the Ducks. Jam-packed show, which is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Football season's not just around the corner, it's here. Visit the FanDuel app today and start planning your futures bets now. So, Oregon should roll. And I'm not breaking anything. Well, to some in Stillwater, perhaps. I might be orchestrating a take of the warm-ish variety. But the more I look into this matchup and the more I think about it, the more I can't get behind Oklahoma State hanging around. I don't know what exactly that would look like. I think Oregon could make a couple of mistakes in this game and they could still wind up winning pretty comfortably. They could get off to a slow start, roll them in the second half. I am surprised the line is just as big as it was last week, according to our friends at FanDuel, 28.5 points. I think Oregon wins. I think Oregon covers. My score prediction, 45-13. I think that Oregon is going to have a game that looks somewhat similar to last week. Not having Haas Haney, I think, is a pretty significant factor for me in this game. I don't think that Zane Flores, for the quarterback for Oklahoma State, is horrible. You know, if you look at a couple of the throws he made last week in his first career action, looks solid. I mean, he was a 3-star quarterback prospect coming out of high school. That's what he looks like. He's not incredibly mobile, but he's not immobile. He doesn't have a horrible arm, but he doesn't have a great arm, and he can make some good Power 4 level throws. Like, he's a starting caliber. He can be a starting caliber quarterback, but the biggest reason that I feel confident about Oregon going into this game is what I talked about with Jake Butt of the Big Ten Network last week going into the Montana State game. The trenches are a big differentiator. And in the non-conference matchups this year, not that this is a new trend in college football, but in some of the games that, you know, the Big 12 has lost, like Baylor against Auburn or the ACC, they've lost games to the SEC in some spots. And, I mean, there have been some good outcomes for the Big 12 so far, but overall, those have mostly been against lower-tier teams in other conferences. But they're getting outworked in the trenches. That's just been the difference. And when you watch the Oklahoma State game last week, they should have some problems. Oregon should be incredibly disruptive in this game. And there's a question I'll talk about later for one of Oklahoma State's players that could make it even tougher for their defensive line to affect Oregon in this spot. Whether Emmanuel Pranon plays or not this week, I didn't feel like there was a major drop-off at all in their week one performance for the offensive line because the depth is there, there's experience, there are a lot of things to like about Oregon with that particular unit, and we're already seeing, unfortunately, why I talked about coming into this year, it's important for the Ducks to be 7 to 8 guys deep along the offensive line. I think they are. I really do. So I don't know how Oklahoma State significantly is going to be able to disrupt Oregon on that side of the ball unless the Ducks get in their own way and pull an Idaho game of sorts from last year. But the other thing is last week Oklahoma State took on UT Martin and they struggled running the ball. As a team, they averaged 3 yards a carry. They went 42 carries for 127 yards and a couple of touchdowns. Their lead running back, Khalib Hicks, he and Vihali, Sessi Vihali, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, were their 2 leading rushers. And then their 3rd leading rusher last week was Haas Haney, their quarterback. Now, Haney has a better arm and he is more mobile than Zane Flores, who's going to start for them this week because unfortunately Haney got hurt. I think that would have been more of a challenge for the Ducks. Certainly, I think that makes a pretty sizable difference here. But with the way Oregon's defensive line looked last week, the depth they have up front, the high-end talent, I think it's going to be really, really difficult for Oklahoma State to consistently move the ball up and down the field. Now, they have a couple of playmakers on the outside that could beat Oregon for a spot, or Flores could make a throw. But that trench difference, to me, is pretty sizable. And unless Oklahoma State radically outperforms what they did last week up front against UT Martin, I think this game could look and feel very similar to the Montana State game from a week ago. One thing I'm really excited to watch, though, interested, curious might be, excited is a word, but interested and curious, the running back room. Because last week we saw everybody play, and Lanning got asked about Mekhi Hughes and how little he played. He said, he was in there in the 2-minute drill, but obviously you're throwing the ball more in that situation. He was in there and run plays were called, but they obviously always have RPO tags pretty much when they run the ball out of shotgun. So those balls got thrown because there were loaded boxes, and he was not heavily involved. Maybe he'll be more involved this week. Maybe he still needs time to grow into the offense, learn the playbook and that sort of stuff. But if Mekhi Hughes, let's say that last week was really indicative of what we're going to see the rest of the year from the running back position, what is Noah Whittington's workload going to look like? Remember, this is a guy who has had an injury at one point in his career. Would they feel comfortable giving him, 20 to 25 carries in a week? Or is this going to be kind of like the receiver room that I've talked about and did on yesterday's show, where it's just going to be as balanced and dispersed from a touches standpoint as we can really ever remember? Because you had De'Aaron Hill be second on the team in rushing yards. You had Jordan Davison getting 3 touchdowns in that game. Well, that was good and fine, of course, against Montana State. It was really fun to see those guys popping as true freshmen in their first college football games. Is that going to condense this week? Or because I expect Oregon to win comfortably, are we going to have the same sort of feeling? Like, if Oregon plays to their potential during these first 4 games, which they certainly did against Montana State, if they're able to repeat that 3 times in a row and they just keep rotating guys, we could go into the Penn State game and not know who Oregon is going to lean on as a number 1 running back. Now, I'd suspect it's Noah Whittington. It's his 4th year with the Ducks. He's proven that he's really good. But maybe they go into that game and there are 3 guys that are going to get 10 to 15 carries a game when Oregon's running the ball. I'm interested to see how that plays out, if that condenses it all. If Dante Moore is able to, as I talked about in yesterday's show, connect on a couple more deep shots, or more specifically, does he start to hone in on one guy that he really looks for in big spots, or that he just has great rhythm and timing with, whether that's DeCorian Moore or Malik Benson or Gary Bryant? I don't know. I think those are, kind of the background storylines. I don't highlight them as keys or big needs for Oregon in this game. I think it's just something to note as we watch the evolution of this team throughout the course of the year, because the way that the first game played out, they were able to just play so many different guys. And I don't think that when, you get in a tight spot, they're just going to be randomly rotating players in to try to get as many snaps as possible. So excited to see what they can put on the field this week. Last week I said you can evaluate that game at a 4 out of 10 in terms of how strong your takeaway should be, because it was Montana State. I think Oklahoma State is a 5. And again, Penn State on the road is a 10, like the best measuring stick you could possibly get. Oklahoma State is a 5, 5.5, I think, compared to a 4 for Montana State. So whatever data we get this week, I don't think it's all telling, but I do think that it is more solid information to set our expectations for what this Oregon team could be week in and week out throughout the year. Because, of course, it looks one way on paper, but then when you get out on the field, sometimes it can be different. So I've got Oregon 45-13. Drop your comments below with score predictions. Hit me up on Twitter, all of that good stuff. If Oregon's going to do that, 3 things need to take place. First, this episode brought to you by DoorDash. It's almost the weekend. Time to look back and crown this week's MVP on Who Delivered, powered by DoorDash. Just like you can win every Saturday with DoorDash Streaks, saving more every time you order, these players delivered when it mattered most for the Ducks. And we have to start last week with Jordan Davison, who I would love to see be in a Jordan James type role from his true freshman season when he was a goal line specialist. I'm here for it. 6 foot, 235 pounds. He was going against high school kids last year. It's a crazy thing to think about. He delivered last week 3 touchdowns in his first game. And Malik Benson, first game as a Duck, not a guy that necessarily had all the hype and pomp and circumstance and expectations in the world, but led Oregon in receptions and yards last week. Those two guys delivered for the Ducks, just like DoorDash can deliver your Saturdays. With DoorDash Streaks, you save every Saturday you order, stack it up all season, and you could save up to $250, including $100 in DoorDash credits. Order this Saturday. Keep the streak alive. Fuel your game day only with DoorDash. Terms apply. Promo period through November 18th. This episode also brought to you by our friends over at Mazda. Mazda crafts cars for those who choose to do more than simply move. They follow what makes them move every time they drive. And that's what makes Mazda stand out. They go beyond safety, style, and performance to deliver a driving experience that feels alive in every detail. Mazda offers more than safety, but they offer that too. It's won more 2025 IIHS Top Safety Pick awards than anyone else as of August 2025. As an athlete focuses on every detail, Mazda does the same, which I can appreciate. I am a very detail-oriented guy. From metallic accents to hand-stitched Napa leather, Mazda's got it all. It's the small details that make the big plays. And just like there's more to every player, there's more to a Mazda vehicle. Mazda, move and be moved. All right, let's put down the second segment sip. Let's put down the drama. Let's talk about Oregon's big keys in this game. Number one, this is going to sound similar to my keys going into Montana State last week because I think there are plenty of similarities here. Oregon's a big favorite. Oregon should be dominant in the trenches. Oregon is at home, and I think Oregon's going to win and cover. So certainly some similarities, but as I've mentioned, I think Oklahoma State is a tougher task on paper than Montana State is. Key number one, score early. This is not an Oklahoma State team who at home last week, it was just week one, far be it from us as Oregon fans to judge a team for a week one performance against an inferior opponent. We know that teams can improve, but if Oregon scores early in this game, you get the crowd roaring. It's going to be a day game, not a night game. Autzen should still be hopping. I hope that fans take the comments from Mike Gundy this week as a shot at the Autzen crowd. I wasn't totally sure that it was, but you know what? Let's interpret it that way. Be on fire. This is the first time Oklahoma State's quarterback Zane Flores is starting a game on the road. It's only the second time in his career he's even entering a college football game. If you score early and put that pressure on Oklahoma State to try to play catch up, especially if you get a 2-possession lead early on, and you're having to throw the ball because you feel like, boy, we can't take a bunch of time off this clock. We just don't. And then you allow the defensive line to pin their ears back. Good luck. Good luck trying to block the Oregon defensive line in obvious passing situations. So I think Cody mentioned earlier this week of Locked On Oklahoma State that, he didn't think the offensive line when he went back and watched it was as bad as he initially thought. I think he has a point in that regard. However, when you're starting from the point of the offensive line was bad. It wasn't as bad as we thought. Yeah, that was UT Martin. This is Oregon. You got Amari Washington and Mateo Uyunglele up front. Those guys are future early round NFL draft picks. Not even to mention guys like Tatum Tuioti or Barry Alexander or Aiden Breland or any number of guys that are going to see the field. I think we see plenty of rotation on that defensive line again. They're deep. They're really, really talented. I think guys up there could be in for a really, really big day. Maybe not so much in the sack department. Gundy's a good coach, and I think he's well aware that Oregon has the better roster in this spot. I don't think he wants his young quarterback to sit back there and try to hold the ball to take deep shots. I think he and his OC, who Dan Lanning has not coached against before, I've watched that interaction. We got him, boys, so many times this week. It's hilarious. And James Krabbe was a good sport about it. It was funny. It was a great moment. So I don't think they want to try and push the limits of what their O-line can do against this Oregon front. So I think you're going to see a lot of quick passes from Oklahoma State. This is an offense that'll run plenty of RPOs. I think we'll see a lot of that to try to get their offense in a rhythm, try to get Zane Flores in a rhythm. But you want to put Oklahoma State on their heels right away. Like if Oregon wins the toss, take the ball. Take the ball, go down the field, score a touchdown, and say, all right, you better keep up and set the tone early in this one. I think both sides of the ball can have a tone-setting start to the game, but yeah, score early. That's key number one. Key number two, and this was a great thing we saw last week against the Bobcats, but again, tougher task this week. You have a greater depth of receivers. Taco Dowler from Montana State, really good, went for over 100 yards. But Oregon's got to win third down. They were great last week defensively on third down. And, criticisms that have been levied against Tosh Lupoi in the past have often, I think, stemmed from the lack of third down success. And I think people have correctly tied that to, is Tosh the best defensive play caller? They were great last week. Now, it's Montana State. You should be great. Well, same thing here. You got to be able to get off the field against Oklahoma State. Don't let them extend drives, because what Oklahoma State's path to keeping this game tight with Oregon is, and again, Gundy, based on his comments, just the fact that he's been one of the best coaches in college football for a couple decades at this point, makes me think he knows they can't get into a shootout. They can't go, like the Ohio State game at Autzen last year, 32-31 final. They're not capable of doing that, especially with a backup quarterback. So their formula to keeping it close is like Oregon State last year. What did Oregon State do? Ran the ball, took up a bunch of clock, got first downs, and shrunk the game. Once Oregon started getting off the field on third down in the second half of that Oregon State game, they went on a 27-0 run in quarters 3 and 4. So if Oregon can prevent Oklahoma State from condensing the game down to limit the total number of points scored, that, like, if Oklahoma State's going to make this uncomfortable, the under total is going to hit, which is something I'm going to get a number for right now, courtesy of our friends at FanDuel, of course. But that's definitely, I think, where they 55.5 is the over-under. Oklahoma State wants that to be under. They do not want that to go over, because that means Oregon's offense is creating explosives, and it means they're trying to get into a shootout. I don't think that's what they're going to want to do. So winning third down, I think, is a huge, huge key for Oregon in this game. And then key number 3, pressure Zane Flores. This is his first road start. Ask Arch Manning how easy it is to go on the road to a Big Ten power. That's still a weird thing to say, but hey, Oregon's the reigning champs. I think they've earned that title. Ask him how easy it is to go make your first road start against a top 10 team in college football. Arch Manning, significantly more talented than Zane Flores. They actually came out in the same quarterback class, 2023. This is both their third year of college football, but Arch had played in more games, and Arch is a more talented player. He has better weapons around him, and he really, really struggled. And I don't think Arch is destined to suck forever. He was really bad against the Buckeyes, though. Flores should not have a phenomenal game in this spot. They, last week against UT Martin, when he came in for the injured Haas Haney, he was 13 of 20 throwing the ball for 136 yards. He had a nice 41-yard completion down the sideline to Terrell Davis. Is a really, really good throw. Kind of reminded me of some throws we saw Cam Ward make against the Ducks over the years. And I think that it doesn't have the same arm talent, obviously, but I just point that out to say it's not as if the guy is completely incapable or there aren't weapons. I'll get more into Oklahoma State's guys later, but I think you pressure him early, you rattle him a little bit, and make them, make them get away from wanting to take those shots. Even though, I was just talking about condensing the game. I do think that Oklahoma State, based on how they played last week, they want to get the ball down the field a little bit. But if you bring everything up and make Oklahoma State think, okay, we can't take the shots down the field. Like, if you take that away early because you're pressuring Zane Flores, I think you just limit what Oklahoma State can do offensively. One of you was asking me whether Zane Flores is a runner at quarterback. I wouldn't describe him as immobile. I wouldn't describe him as a great runner. They're going to run a hefty number of RPOs in this game, but he's not as good of an athlete as Dante Moore. He's not as good of an athlete as Dylan Gabriel. I don't even know what Vernon Adams, maybe, like athletically. Vernon Adams could move, run a little bit. It's not really a feature of his game. Like, he's not a statue, he's not Phillip Rivers back there, but he's also not exactly Anthony Brown or even Tyler Shuck as a runner. So biggest keys for Oregon to getting a win: Score early, put the pressure on the Oklahoma State offense, win third down, don't let them chew the clock, and pressure Zane Flores to rattle the cage and don't let them get explosive plays that can take the air out of the stadium. You do those three things, Oregon is going to be just fine in this game. This is not the only black and orange OSU game Oregon will play. Will there be another one to take on that and players to know for the Cowboys going into game 2? First, this episode brought to you by Upside. Locked On Ducks fans, are you still paying full price for gas? I don't know why. Stop leaving money behind. Get real cash back every time you fill up with the free Upside app. Simply download the free Upside app in the App Store or Google Play right now and start earning cash at the pump today. Use my limited time promo code FOOTBALL and get an extra 25 cents back per gallon on your first fill up. You could make up to $300 a year just from buying the gas you already needed. You know what you could do with that to up your tailgate experience? Quite a bit. At first, you might think it's too good to be true, but it's totally legit. Real people are getting paid just to make their daily commutes, and you can too. Plus, you can cash out anytime to your bank account, PayPal, or an e-gift card for Amazon and other brands. Don't let this offer drive on by. See what they did there? Download the free Upside app now using my limited time promo code FOOTBALL for a limited time 25 cent per gallon bonus. That's promo code FOOTBALL. Offers vary by user and location. Go to upside.com for terms and conditions. FanDuel also bringing you this episode and the 28.5 point spread that favors the Ducks going into this one. That's a big number. I think Oregon's covering this week. If you want to hedge your happiness with Oklahoma State plus 28.5, go for it. You're entitled to do so. You can take Oregon minus 28.5 if you think they are steamrolling as they did last week. The NFL season is now here, and FanDuel's making sure you're ready for kickoff with a can't-miss offer. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. They're going to have the Oregon game every week. They're going to have college football every week, the NFL every week. You can spice up your weekends all season long with FanDuel. So if you're ready to play, go ahead. Download the FanDuel app now by visiting FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com to place your first $5 bet. All right, so real quick before I talk about a couple of Oklahoma State names to know going into this matchup, Nathan sent in this for Spencer's scale of agreement. Oregon will win the OSU Cup this year. All 3 OSU teams in 1 year. I'm guessing no one has ever played all 3 in a season, and of course, the Ducks would have to face Ohio State in the Big Ten Championship and or playoffs. All 3. I mean, I think Oregon's winning this week. In 2 weeks against the Beavs, I think Oregon is winning. Will they face Ohio? Well, They would not have to beat Penn State in order to face Ohio State at some point this year. You could see them in the playoff. Penn State could lose to Ohio State and somehow somebody else, and Oregon could make the Big Ten title game with a loss to them at 11-1. Those things are all possible. But if they get there, would they? I think Oregon and Ohio State, very similar teams this year, resetting a lot, young, talented quarterbacks. But, if you watch what Julian Sayin did for Ohio State against Texas, he wasn't asked to do very much. They had like 200 yards of total offense against a great Texas defense. So, he's got room to grow. And we know that Dante Moore still has room to grow as well. All 3, I mean, this is basically asking if Oregon were, like the likelihood, I suppose it's a 5 that they'd face Ohio State. My confidence going into that game, I'm going to put this at a 5. I'm going to put this at a 5. I think Oregon's winning the first 2, but you included the Ohio State part of it. So I think that's just as likely as not. I think Oregon and Ohio State, pretty comparable teams this year. I think it's just as likely as not for them to match up in one of those settings. So, yeah, give me a 5 on that one. All right, let's wrap up talking about the Cowboys here on a Friday show. So, 2 receivers that stood out last week were the guys that led the Cowboys in receiving yards. Terrell Davis, former Division II guy at an Oklahoma school, now with the Cowboys, had 2 catches for 75 yards, and Shamar Rigby had a big reception as well last week. 2 catches for 50 yards total on the day. They both actually hauled in 41-yard receptions, and I think that for this Oregon secondary, this is a stronger test. They're different tests, I'll say. These guys, at least through one game this year, made their mark with downfield explosive shots. Montana State wasn't able to take any of those because the defensive line was so dominant, and I would love to see that sort of game plan work out again for Oregon's defense. Like I mentioned for my third key of the game, is make them go all the way up and down the field. Don't give them any easy plays and whatnot. But, these guys are certainly capable. I think they would certainly both start for Montana State, maybe even over Taco Dowler. They're both bigger than Dowler is. But I think it's a good, I don't know about good. It's a better test for this Oregon secondary. I think we all kind of love the way they played last week. Dowler's a guy. Like that dude. That dude is absolutely a stud, and he went for over 100 yards. Oregon's going to see receivers a lot better than him this year. And, maybe he'd be the starting slot receiver for this Oklahoma State offense. But I think that if, he were on the team, like, would he be the number one guy? Could be, but it's different. These are guys that were not making their money on, shorter routes or, again, just through one game this year, but they weren't doing it through shorter routes and slants and RPOs and whatnot. There were a couple of downfield shots. So I'd like to see the Oregon secondary take those away if they are taken at all by the Oklahoma State offense, if the defensive line is not getting home, or if it's just shotgun max protection and we're just gonna throw it deep and see if Davis can go make a play. Those are two guys that I think are solid. I don't think they're the best receivers Oregon's going to face this year or anything. Probably save that for Denzel Boston at Washington. USC's got a couple guys. Elijah Surratt for Indiana, just to name a few off the top of my head. But Trent Walker at Oregon State, we know from last year that guy's a good player. But yeah, those are two guys that if they're not creating explosive plays, then I think Oregon is doing something right. And the secondary last week, outside of one guy, really good. Not a whole heck of a lot of notes, but progress can always be made. So for Zane Flores at quarterback, first career start, actually. He came in relief of Haas Haney last week. Like, he should struggle. If this Oregon defense plays well, he should struggle. It should be incredibly difficult for him to settle in, to move the ball, to consistently find completions, to get the offense to stay on the field on third down. Like, I just don't know what about this game should make me think anything aside from Oregon should dominate here and Zane Flores should walk away going, I'm going to learn from this one and be better. And I don't think the guy's career is doomed and he's a terrible player. It's just this is a tough spot. Over on Locked On College Football today, I talked about Bryce Underwood. He's making his second career start and his first on the road against Oklahoma in Norman, which is where Oklahoma is, for those who don't know. So in that game, I feel the same way. Like, it shouldn't be that easy. It should be really, really hard, especially when there's this big of a talent gap. So, Flores, I don't think that he should be able to have more than 200 yards or so passing in this game. If that, would love to see the Oregon defense really shut him down and have one of those games like we saw last year against a UCLA or a Purdue defensively where, Oregon just doesn't allow a whole heck of a lot. Last year, the only touchdown UCLA scored was Dylan Gabriel's pick six. I would love for this to be that sort of game. The other name to note here is Wendell Gregory. So Wendell Gregory is a transfer from South Carolina. He was a blue chip prospect at defensive end, outside linebacker coming out of high school. And there was an incident. He was arrested off the field, and we don't know if he's going to play. Mike Gundy said, we're going to proceed as normal, and our SID will let you know if anything changes. So keep an eye on that. He is their most disruptive player off the edge. He had a huge game last week against UT Martin. He is really built. And do I like Oregon's tackles? I do. They played really well after 1 week, especially Alex Harkey was making blocks all over the field. But Wendell Gregory was their most disruptive defensive player last week, and certainly a guy that if he's not on the field, that's just another advantage for Oregon. So if Oregon's got a big talent advantage already, no starting quarterback, if they're also without their best pass rusher and Dante Moore has time, this should be another really fun game to watch. Let's hope that we're not sweating come Saturday afternoon. Appreciate everyone listening. I'll see you next time. Until then, hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day, and go Ducks.